Welcome back for tonight's big point. This week, Senator Bernie Sanders, official beloved loon bag of the Democratic establishment, sounded off on what America meant to him. He did so while appearing with alleged comedian Sarah Silverman, who's mostly famous for saying dirty words in a little girl voice. So Bernie is both ignorant and unfunny, but at least he does have that cute bunny voice that makes him beloved to college students everywhere. And also, he loves pudding. His entire lake house filled with different flavors of pudding. Bernie's statement is actually important because it does reveal a serious gap in the way Americans from the hard left think versus the rest of America. In the view of the hard left, universal ills are uniquely America's fault. Specific goods are actually the result of universal culture. So poverty, America's fault. Landing on the moon, a world achievement. War, America's fault. A thriving global economy, a world achievement. The hard left believes America's an evil, awful place, founded in racism, sexism, bigotry, homophobia. All of our pretentious talk about all men being created equal with inalienable rights, all of that is just cover for the patriarchy, heteronormative, cisgender power structure that deprives outsiders of their due. That's the view of Howard Zinn, of Hollywood, and of Bernie Sanders. It's why many on the left kneel for the flag. The flag is the symbol of a uniquely bad nation with a uniquely bad idea. This is all absolutely wrong. America's founding creed, the belief in God-given individual rights, protected by limited government enshrined by a virtuous people, has achieved precisely the opposite of what Sanders says. No, America does not starve little children. America lifts little children from poverty. The power of the America-led free trade and free market economy has alleviated global poverty faster than any force in human history. We are the engine of the world's prosperity, and that engine is going strong. According to the World Bank, over the last 3 decades, extreme global poverty has dropped by 74.1%. Literally hundreds of millions of people have been lifted from poverty by the power of the American economy and its involvement in the world economy. And little children aren't starving in America either. Robert Rector and Rachel Sheffield of the Heritage Foundation report, quote, "A poor child is more likely to have cable TV, a computer, a widescreen plasma TV, an Xbox, or a TiVo in the home than to be hungry." According to Pew Research, the U.S. stands head and shoulders above the rest of the world in terms of wealth. 56% of Americans were high income by global standards. 32% were upper middle income. Only 2% of Americans are poor by global standards. How about giving tax breaks to billionaires? As Senator Sanders well knows, the highest income earners in America pay the most taxes. By far, it's not close. The top 1% of earners, you know, the 1%, they pay 39% of federal income taxes. The top 10% pay 70.6% of federal income taxes. The bottom 50% of income earners pay less than 3% of our federal income taxes. America's tax system is more progressive than any other developed country in the world, according to the Washington Post. You can't cut taxes for tax brackets that barely pay taxes. And Bernie could start by donating that lake house. What about bombing homes and houses of children? Let's just remind Senator Sanders that America defeated slavery and Nazism and communism. Well, to be fair, he might still be a bit bitter about that last one. America spent more blood and treasure defending the freedom of others than any country in world history. The Union lost some 365,000 soldiers in the Civil War to free the slaves. 117,000 in World War I to keep Europe free of German imperialism. 405,000 Americans died in World War II to keep the world free of fascism. 37,000 died to keep South Korean people free. 58,000 died in a vain attempt to keep the Vietnamese people free. More than 2,000 in a continuing attempt to free Afghanistan of its terror masters. And yes, 4,500 in a continuing attempt to free Iraq. That doesn't mean America hasn't made mistakes. But the American fighting men and women have been more humane in their pursuit of liberty for others than any other fighting force in human history, and the world has trended toward democracy and freedom because of it. So, Senator Sanders, I'd love to tell you precisely where you can go, but I'm on Fox News. And on Fox News, just like in the Senate, we're still not allowed to curse.
That was Senator Bernie Sanders slamming the U.S. in a new interview. This coming after Hillary Clinton declared in a recent essay that American democracy is in crisis. Let's bring back our A-team, Capri Cafaro, Chris Bedford, and Philip Bump. Chris?
You know, he was kind of joking here, but it shows also what he thinks. This could have been a headline in a Students for Democratic Society newspaper in 1968, which is kind of where Bernie Sanders comes from, the old campus left, the old 60s left. What's going on in Yemen, he's been protesting that, is pretty serious. It's a war between Saudi Arabia and basically their proxies for Iran. People are getting killed, and these are two mean forces, and they're going at it. And the kind of scale and the dangers of this war that we're seeing in Yemen show how just and how careful the United States is when we conduct any kind of military operations.
But, Philip, the situation, horrible, what's going on with Yemen. The bombing of that bus, which the critics say was bombed by the Saudis using American munitions, and that we basically have blood on our hands, and the senator's referring to that. But he's doing it in a jocular way.
Right, yeah, I mean, it's tricky ground. I mean, he's obviously sitting there with Sarah Silverman, who's a comedian as well. It's clear that he was intending to be joking. We certainly have seen lots of jokes in politics go south. I think yeah, I mean, it's hard to read that as whether or not it landed as a joke is a whole different question, but I think he meant it that way. I think that what Senator Sanders, he's in a different position now, though, than he was certainly back when he was in college, but even before he ran for president. He is now essentially the voice of the far left in the United States. Perhaps Ocasio-Cortez is sort of creeping up on him in that regard. But those sorts of jokes are going to land a lot differently now than they would have 3 years ago, simply by virtue of his heightened position in the conversation.
As someone who was not a declared Democrat for decades, who represented Vermont as an independent since the early 1990s, and now it's unfortunately it's joking or not, it's these kind of statements that I think are damaging to the Democratic Party, and people point to and say this is why we don't believe that Democrats are supportive of America or patriotic. So he has to be careful, as do we.
Is that a fair assessment?
It's absolutely not a fair assessment. I mean, certainly Democrats are just as patriotic as any American, but with statements like this, it's an easy soundbite to point to.
Or how about statements like this? This is a chunk from the recent essay published in The Atlantic by Hillary Clinton, calling into question our democracy. She writes, quote, "Trump and his cronies do so many despicable things that it can be hard to keep track. I think that may be the point, to confound us, so it's harder to keep our eye on the ball." The ball, of course, is protecting American democracy. As citizens, that's our most important charge. And right now, our democracy is in crisis.
Well, she's absolutely right. We have an intelligence service. It seems like it could have been undermining the presidential candidate. We have American citizens being spied on with secret courts. The democracy is under threat right now, and it's not because Democrats lost the election. This is a common thing that you see from Democrats. If they lose something, that means the system doesn't work, whether that system is Facebook, Twitter, whether that system is democracy, the Electoral College. They always say the system is broken. Democracy is under threat because their ideas didn't win. And it may make sense, because if you live in New York, you don't know anyone who disagrees with you. So they couldn't even imagine how President Donald Trump could be president. But it happened because outside there are people who disagree.
But what about those who blame President Trump and his tone, his tenor, and his rhetoric?
The American Republic is way stronger than tweets, and any kind of bad words, as Bernie Sanders just talked about in his interview, those aren't going to undermine American democracy. I think our systems are stronger than that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a totally valid point that speech itself is not necessarily going to undermine America. I mean, Donald Trump has certainly made comments that, I mean, he said in the past, America does bad things too in defense of Vladimir Putin, for example. So, I mean, there are lots of ways you can talk about America which don't necessarily undercut America. I think it's the Hillary Clinton. The timing of this piece in The Atlantic is sort of fascinating because it comes on the heels of Barack Obama essentially making the same argument in a speech last week or the week prior. Everything's sort of blurry by now. But I think that the points that are raised, yes, it certainly is the case that Hillary Clinton in particular is frustrated by the results of the 2016 election. But that doesn't change the fact that there are lots of indicators that Donald Trump's approach to the presidency is vastly different than past presidents in a way that runs contrary to, I think, what a lot of people would expect of an American president. And I think that fosters legitimate concern among Americans, Hillary Clinton included, Barack Obama included, but that Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama are both trying to tap into, and Democrats are trying to tap into.
I think it's bad. I think it's bad timing for Hillary Clinton because I think she's the wrong messenger for this message because she looks like a sore loser. But there are legitimate concerns here. I think there's no question, as you said, Philip, that President Trump has absolutely thrown all sort of conventional norms of governance out the window, and certainly as he publicly maligns Jeff Sessions voices concerns about how the judicial process works, is not particularly, clear on whether or not he thinks the justice branch is a co-equal, branch of government. That being said, when we throw around things like crisis, it's a constitutional crisis or democracy in crisis, that's when I think people start to shut off. You lose, any kind of merit that might be in that argument, because they just say, oh, this is a sore loser, it's political, it's
and it was right away. Remember when right after he was elected, he and his wife sneaked away for a steakhouse. They didn't tell the press pool, and we were told that was a constitutional crisis.
I mean, is that a winning message for the Democrats, or do you think it'll fall on deaf ears?
I think that the only winning message for Democrats is to focus on what we can offer rather than being against, Donald Trump.
Some might make the argument they haven't gotten that message yet.